we still like viewed, like, especially when we play like a festival with like hundreds of thousands of people, we, and at least for ourselves, looked at it a little bit like a competition, and that we had to believe that we were going to be the best of anybody that was going to play on that stage. You know, you have to have this belief in what you're doing. Otherwise, I just don't think you can do it. It's like, it's almost like, to me, a little bit separate from ego.
Yeah.
Because it's like you have to have this belief that you're beyond good. Otherwise, you can't be beyond good.
That's Mike D, and I'm Jamie Brisick, and you're listening to Soundings, brought to you by the Surfer's Journal. The Surfer's Journal is a reader-supported publication. Visit surfersjournal.com to subscribe. Mike D is many things, but among them he is a Beastie Boy and a surfer. So, Mike, how did you find your way to surfing?
Well, the very, very first thing is, I remember there's one point on tour, we were very fond as a band of going to Japan and Australia. You know, even if it was just a few things that could kind of make it all make sense, we'd grab that opportunity to go. But then I think in going to Australia, that was the first point. We were at one point, we were attempting to write lyrics and write songs for one of our records, and we rented a house outside of Sydney, up in like the northern beaches area.
Okay. Yep.
And you know, as when you're there, everybody surfs. So I was just kind of like, well, I should try and figure this out a little bit. Of course, it didn't go that well for me, but I tried. That was my first foray into trying to figure it out. And then it wasn't really until then I moved to Malibu, being in the Little Doom area, that, you know, really having the access to surf, where it was like, yeah, I should really be doing this, which I know now sounds cliche, now that the entire world is doing exactly, especially during COVID and beyond, is doing exactly that. But it was this thing where I was just like, oh gosh, I should have done it sooner. But I did have, what was interesting is I did have somehow the foresight. I knew somehow that surfing was going to be something, even though my kids were like, Davis, my older son, was maybe 2 years old or something at this point. But I could see he already was like very ocean fixated. And I just kind of knew, all right, surfing's going to be a big part of his life. So if I want to have basically any chance of having a relationship or hanging out with my kids, I better figure out the surfing stuff.
Yep.
So it served me well. I mean, they've obviously figured it out infinitely better than I ever will, but that's just how it goes, because they started really young.
So I lived in New York from maybe 2002 to about 2013, but I remember seeing you regularly at Eddie Stern's yoga classes in the morning in the city, in Soho, basically. And then a few years later, I would see you out on the surf all the time at Little Doom. But and it's interesting because, you know, you had a great yoga practice, by the way. I noticed that. But there are
better than my surfing.
Well, there are similarities. Yeah. I mean, it's almost like seeing a kind of warrior stance on the mat, and then seeing you ride across a wave at Little Doom. Did you feel like, was surfing kind of an extension of the process of doing yoga and everything yoga represents?
I wouldn't say extension, but they did relate. They are relatable to me. And this way, sorry to go back one. I'll answer that question, but yeah. So how I should have learned to surf. It's funny because you mentioned when you were living in New York. Is the craziest thing to me is I was going to high school in Brooklyn Heights, and we were like the kids that we looked up to, like Tony Alva, Bones Brigade. I got to give Steve Olson.
Yeah,
shout out, because he was like this unfathomable. It's so funny now being friendly with Steve, but like at the time of being like a young teenager, you know, the idea of like that you could be sort of like James Dean and skate with great style.
Yeah.
And have great style was just like this unfathomable combination. But anyway, so we looked up to all these guys, and so it's just funny, but I didn't, in high school, I never connected the dots of like, well, Rockaway was only, 30 minutes away. I could have been going out there after school or on weekends or whatever, surfing, but just that notion wasn't a popular one at that time.
No, absolutely.
Right.
And now that's kind of a thing, and people know it and know it's available. But I think maybe at that time it wasn't so much. And
there was probably at that time, there's probably like Pat Conlon.
Yeah.
And Pat Conlon.
Yeah. No, exactly. No, and Pat's a good friend. But no, I think it was so, it's this sort of concrete jungle lifestyle, but you didn't realize that there was this incredible resource right there. Just, you just had to just move a little bit further over and there was the ocean to surf. But what I do find really interesting, and I'll tell you a story. So I fondly remember being at Selena's in Coogee in probably 1991 or 92 and seeing the Beastie Boys. Mm-hmm. And I think I was like slamming around the mosh pit while you guys were on stage, and it was terrific. And at that time, it felt like almost worlds away. Like I was a surfer guy. I actually lived on the northern beaches at that time. I would probably surfed Bondi that morning because I worked in the city for a surf magazine. And seeing you guys and seeing, okay, like I look at you now and you're tan, you look like you've been in the water today or yesterday or whatever. You look like you get in the ocean regularly. At that time, you guys were like distinctly New York guys. Yeah. And even the way you dressed, it was a big divide between the life of a Beastie Boy and maybe hip hop and punk, etc., and like the surfer thing. Now they're more integrated, I guess. But what I wanted to ask you is, I know you were recently in Mexico with Steph Gilmore and your sons and a crew of people surfing. Now that you know pretty well at this point, like what the pro surfing lifestyle is and what it is to be on tour, how is the pro surfing touring life similar to the musician's touring life?
Well, that's probably for you and I to hash out together from both our perspectives. But I do think, it's interesting because you'd also mentioned something in your email to me. You were talking about from our book, Adam Horovitz wrote that Ring story about how, Yauk literally in this pranksterish way tormented Adam Horovitz for years. Like not even years, decades, freaking decades. He tormented Adam, and I mean, tormenting sounds harsh, but he basically did like, he pushed Horovitz to like almost like nervous breakdown level. That's how full on Yauk's level of commitment to the prank was. And it was just this like,
will you tell that story?
In hindsight, it sort of like it's not going to quite resonate without giving the whole long story. But basically we go do this let me think about this. It was like 1989. Paul's Boutique is out. We go and we do a record signing at Tower Records in San Francisco. So as you can imagine, like with San Francisco, you always get a veritable sort of like freak show of humanity that come out for whatever you're doing. But especially cut to here's Beastie Boys and we're at, Tower Records and whatever. So there's this like guy who kind of like, waits patiently in line and then shows up to get his stuff signed. But he has this thing of like, you don't want to even look him in the eyes because it's like these saucers that you feel like might just imbibe like Satan's residue inside of you, or who knows what is going to happen. And his teeth are all screwed up and, and his eyes are sort of spinning in opposite directions. And for some reason, poor Adam seemed that people with this kind of energy seem to gravitate towards him a little bit more in the band. Anyway, so this guy hones in on him and he's like, I want you to have this ring. It's really important to me to have this ring. So Adam walks away from like this like record signing thing and he's like completely shook and he's like, what the fuck? Like, what am I going to do? Like, I got this ring from this guy. I really don't want it. He completely freaks me out. I think it has like, the everything that's weird and unsettling and evil is all contained in the juju of this ring. But I'm gonna feel really bad if I throw it out. Like what, and maybe that'll curse me. Where there's like an episode of like the Brady Bunch when like
Yes,
Greg has
I was thinking of that. The tiki.
The tiki idol.
And he crashes, he wipes out an Awana, nearly dies. No.
So it's like Adam's like, oh man, is this gonna be right? Is this gonna be the tiki idol bad energy thing? And he's like, I don't know, I got to just get rid of this thing. And so I forget exactly the circumstance, but at some point he decides, he's like, okay, this is how I'm going to dispose of it. And Yauk very cleverly seizes on the moment. So Adam's thinking, okay, fine, I've disposed of this thing. I forget what it was. I think he put it like in this fountain. He put it in a fountain, if I remember rightly, if I remember correctly. Yauk seizes the moment, reaches into the fountain, grabs the ring, and just waits patiently, like, I don't even know, like months and months to go by, and we're on tour somewhere, and then he just carefully places the ring, on tour, and this is where I think the similarities come to, like I imagine surf. The life is, you really are living with each other in a very unique way. You're traveling by, it's like plane, trains, or automobiles every day of your life. And you're kind of like together on mass. So there's many moments that exist where you can go into your buddy's backpack or board bag or whatever and put whatever in there. So Yauk waits and he puts the ring back, and of course then sends Adam off into a tizzy. And this goes on for like literally years. Horowitz trying to get rid of the ring, and then Yauk seizing on the moment, waiting for it, grabbing it, and then waiting to when it's well out of Horowitz's mind, and then returning, bringing the ring back, and literally terrorizing him with it, right? But in answer to your question, I think of what I think I miss in terms of touring with Adam and Adam is really that is like this incredible friendship, and that we got to have, and this adventure of traveling the world together, and getting to do that as like this group and with your best friends. And so, I mean, it's a funny thing, is people will say to me like, "Oh, you miss being on tour," and I really don't. I don't miss like my nervous system being shot and constantly having a cold because I've never slept properly, and eating shitty food and not sleeping properly. But what I miss is playing music with my really good friends and traveling the world with them. And so I think that's this similarity that you must have. And you and I think go through this too, watching some of our friends who are on the pro surfing tour. Now I have this insight into seeing why they might not want to retire. It's not like, yes, sure, they have multiple world championships and have proven what they can prove and have enjoyed themselves beyond anything they ever could have dreamed of within their sport, and the sort of the context of traveling in this brotherhood, sisterhood, whatever, of pro surfing. But what's, I think, hard for them to leave is this thing of, showing up however many months of the year at, Pipe, at Chopu, at Tavarua, at whatever the destinations, at Barra, whatever the destinations are that year, Hosgor. But, with your friends that you get to travel the world with and doing what you love to do.
Yeah.
So
for sure.
I think that's like that kind of like intoxicating, or the thing that's most maybe addictive about that I'm imagining you have sort of in music and in surfing.
For sure. No, it's funny. So the practical joke thing, we would have practical jokes that carried on for years like that. And ours was more like, you might have a surf just before you have a long flight and you have to drag these coffin board bags to the airports, and someone might like stuff their wetsuit wrapped in a towel in someone else's bag so that they have to carry it. And then when we land, like, 3 flights later and like 20 hours later in LAX, you just pull the thing out and laugh and you go, you were carrying like 5 extra pounds of my stuff. But we did all that kind of stuff. But the thing that I think about from those days.
There must have been some more unsightly things you stuck into some of your fellow competitors' board bags as well.
No, we did all kinds of stuff.
There was a lot of porno mags, a lot of things that we were stuffed in other people's luggage, so that we would wait for like the other person's bag to get open, hoping that their bag would get searched at customs and like they'd find the crazy studded dildo or whatever was stashed in the bag.
No, we had plenty of that. I mean, the thing that I think about is, on the one hand, there's something kind of frat boy like. Well, not maybe frat boy is the wrong way of putting it, but there's something maybe
it's childish.
Yes, and it can kind of hold you in place. It can arrest you on some levels. But the other side of it that I think about a lot now, and you and I are very close in age. For me, I stopped being on tour in 1992, so it's been quite some time. But I think back, and what I do think is being on the road, and where you're sort of like one destination to the next. You kind of there's a lot of like real life stuff that you just skate over, you evade. And I always think of the Mickey Dora quote, there is no problem so big or complicated it cannot be run away from. And to some degree, like when you're on the road, a lot of even emotional relationship stuff you kind of can skip out on because you're just sort of being refreshed with new stimulation all the time. And when you get into more kind of, what's the word, like quotidian life in a single destination, I didn't realize it until I stopped that there was this stuff that there was like a level of stimulation that I got to almost like not confront myself on some level that I feel like I have since been confronting for many, many years. But there's almost like maybe a PTSD when you get those stimulating, like those high highs, right? Like you're doing a tour and you're stepping on stage every night to all these people who are like singing along with your songs. Do you come down from that at the end?
Yeah, I think that, well, two things. I think another sort of crossover with surf world is there's this thing that happens, at least for me, that was kind of addictive to being on tour, which is you have these fleeting moments of playing music with people you're playing music with where it is truly transcendent. When it goes well. It doesn't happen every night. And you're actually, there's plenty of nights you're actually sort of like chasing it and it sort of eludes you, and there's nothing almost more frustrating in the world than like this pursuit of transcendence that doesn't occur, right? Mm-hmm. But I think it really is, to me, a shared thing with surfing of like we, all of us, not just even us high aiming, low achieving amateurs such as myself, we stay in it for these moments where it's just us and the ocean and maybe a few of our friends, or maybe not even, but where it's like every speck of water that's out of place when you do a turn, it's like everything gets magnified, in this extremely, I don't know how else to describe it, but extremely like sort of psychedelic or psychedelicized, like magnifying glass, and you're having this
ecstasy.
60 seconds or 30 seconds of ecstatic, moving on a wave seems like a lifetime. And you have that in music as well, where we're playing music with other people, and it's like kind of, and then there's the other 23 hours and however many minutes of your day if you're a touring surfer or a touring musician, that, which is the kind of like ironic thing. And I do think then that's something that I've really only learned now in middle age, or become more aware of in middle age, is really working on my own nervous system and trying to balance it. And looking back at it, I'm like, Jesus, it was, we basically waged war on our own nervous systems, not intentionally, but, you think about the fact we were super adrenalized up until, at least 11 at night. That would be an early show, but often till 1, 2 in the morning. And then we're supposed to sort of just, show's over, drink some water, eat a little bit of food, go to sleep, and hit repeat the next day, and think that it's all going to be fine and that it's not going to catch up to us. And the reality is that's what I think a lot of reason you do see burnout on musicians. It's sort of on a bunch of different levels, but the nervous system is a big part of it. Is I think people get sort of so their adrenals are so sort of spun out, and their cortisol levels so through the roof, and then you get home and you're not hopping on stage and you're not doing this thing that's stimulating endorphins, and you're not sending yourself with that cycle. It's like it is this weird depression that you sort of suffer, because then all of a sudden you're back in your apartment or house or whatever, and you're hanging out with your friends, but it's not the same, right? Because you're not going, your nervous system, your mind, your body, it's not being spun through this whole process. And it can feel really weird. And, and then I think it's also probably a similar thing of like in the surf world, we're 18, 19 years old when we started going on tour. And so you've got we're teenagers still. We're not really good at understanding ourselves emotionally or expressing ourselves emotionally. And we're certainly not good at understanding what might be coming from earlier in our lifetime and why does it feel so weird now. That's all stuff you get to way later. And you certainly aren't good at communicating with each other. And I'm sure on the surf tour, it's the same thing of you're also young of saying like, oh, it was fun when we were doing this, but honestly, it really didn't feel so good when you said A, B, C, or D. You just don't know how to say any of that shit.
No, definitely. And I think I would imagine with the three of you guys and the Beastie Boys, and I had it with my kind of surf bros on tour, where you kind of all buoy each other up. So it's not like your inner life is not necessarily, maybe more so making music and writing songs and making art, I guess. But like the one thing I think back of my pro surfing days is it was really, it was sort of macho in a way. Like, and not to say, I don't mean that we're like,
well, did it have room? I'm guessing it probably didn't have a lot of room for like emotional engagement.
Exactly. I mean, it was kind of like we were all like, it was a locker room environment. You know what I mean? Like everyone was sort of macho, and it was like man up. Like that that's more of a new expression, but like we were saying the equivalent of man up. And the one thing I certainly feel now in my life, and I would think that you do too. And you and I have had many conversations. Like you become more aware of your inner life, and you're more comfortable expressing it. But when you're at that age and you're pumped up with all that adrenaline, that part of yourself can almost be squashed down or like stuffed away, swept under the rug, and not really allowed to come out. And so that's where the arrested thing comes in, because I mean, I just feel like the 5 years.
Most likely that emotional part of you is going to actually be repressed, right? Because it's going to be really scary to let it sort of show itself in front of the group. But it's got to be even harder in a setting where you're competing with each other to have that same, I don't know, that same sense of support or being supported.
Yeah. The one thing I really noticed, and I have plenty of friends who are musicians and successful musicians, you among them, the one distinct difference is if I watch a WSL event and I look at all the great athletes, they all have this sort of fresh face, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, clear eye. There's something so healthy. And I think because it's about physical prowess and athleticism, and happens in the sunshine and happens in the ocean. It's like so overtly healthy. You couldn't do anything more healthy, basically. Whereas I certainly know a lot of really gifted musicians that are pasty, that are skinny and unfit, that maybe drink too much, smoke too much, do whatever else too much. And they're incredibly skilled, and yet that, like, I guess baked into surfing is this health, right? Like this wellness, this well-being.
You can't help but to being exposed to vitamin D. You're physically active.
Yeah. And you fly.
And you pretty much most places in the world, and people who are listening to this know. You got to kind of early bird catches a worm, right?
Yeah.
A lot of places, winds are only favorable in
exactly
those early hours of the day.
Whereas musicians can be sort of night owls, and a lot can happen in a room, several bottles of wine in or what have you. But that's the one thing that's the one kind of distinct difference I see is, and of course there are exceptions. I mean, I think of Andy Irons, where there was a lot going on inside of him that was.
Right.
was needing stuff. But so what would you see as the big similarities between music making and surfing?
The most profound overlap to me of music and surfing is almost that metaphysical, like in the moment.
Yeah. No, and you know what?
That and in their own way, they each activity demands that of you. Like if you're surfing, you're not surfing well.
Yeah.
If you're not totally in the moment, you might even just get your ass totally handed to you, depending upon where you are.
Yes.
Surfing, if you're not that present in the moment, and music, it's the consequence might be different, but it's your same thing. You're not gonna, unless you're really everybody's all like firing into the same sort of intention. Mm-hmm. And it is a very fickle thing when you think about it, in both surfing and in music, of like this weird, it's almost like alchemy or something, right? Because it's like all these different things that have to sort of fire just right, the swell and the swell direction and the tide and where you happen to position in that wave and the timing when it just happens to, all these other sets are swinging wide, but then this one swings to you or whatever. It's, and in music, you have this same thing of like, you all have to be united sort of in intention. And like what you said, what exists already, that the sort of, where the crowd is at and the energy that you're sort of stepping into, all has to kind of line up. And then when it does, it is this thing of like, right after the moment, you're kind of like, wow, this, I think it is a really important and humbling thing, because it is this thing where you realize this thing it's this thing that has happened that we see right away clearly is bigger and beyond all of us and any of our individual selves in ego form. It is like some bigger thing at play.
It's beautifully said. And when you mentioned earlier about being on the road, and then you got, having the band on stage playing night after night, but finding that thing together and how it is fickle and how it is kind of always changing. And there are sort of always these variables that you're kind of dancing with and trying to like get in the groove with. So similar to surfing. I mean, I think you said it beautifully, but that you've got kind of the rhythm that you're in and being your own timing, but then it's all improving with it's sort of like those swells coming at you are probably much like your bandmates, like doing something new, and you're kind of moving with it, I would imagine.
Yeah. Or even like when you go to play a show, you don't know the energy that's going to exist, even when it's a lot of times would be our own headlining shows, like on a tour where we'd be playing sports arena night after night after night in different towns. You don't know what the energy is that you're walking into the room, and you can control it only to a certain degree.
Yeah.
So it is this similar fickle, fleeting thing that you get in surfing.
I have a question. Have you ever had any like major fiasco in the middle of a performance on stage?
Oh, innumerous. Yeah.
What would be like? Is there one like? What would be the worst?
But I do think like we are actually pretty good about like we are not the most professional in terms of. There's some bands that you go see that like play the same set night after night and just perfect that, and that's great. They put on a great show for their audience. We are always, that never felt right to us. Like we always, for us, like we would change the set list every night. We always, it's not like we would expect to play a show to 40,000 people and not play Sabotage. But we always, it was important to us to keep inventing, reinventing, and trying different things in the shows. And sometimes you just, sometimes it works out better than others. And I also think we come from a world where, I don't know, I'm a lot more interested in seeing a live train wreck of a band on stage than I am interested in seeing like some perfectly choreographed like pop music show.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And so we were always a little bit as a band, you know, as much as we were really grateful we got to play in these like arenas night after night. And we worked really hard at actually making the production and making the experience work for these bigger levels, audience wise. It was still, we wanted to remain like kind of like authentic, because the bands that we grew up on that we loved were people where you'd like quite often see a train wreck live.
Yeah.
So there's plenty of times where we'd kind of keep trying, get on stage, try something, keep trying it, and look at each other and be like, you reach a certain point where you're just like, you sort of shrug and you're like, I guess this didn't happen for us tonight. And, you know, a lot of times you're really freaking frustrated. I guess my parallel to surfing would be like when you see athletes after their heat and they're punching their surfboards and stomping and whatever. We have those nights too, for sure, where we're just like, what the fuck, you know, and throwing shit at lockers and being like, when nothing came together, you know, and it feels so futile and so frustrating and really kind of defeating. But I guess that's the fleeting thing about it all. Cause then thankfully you'll have a night, the next night or 2 nights later or 3 nights later where it does all come together. And then you're like, I'm vindicated. It wasn't all for nothing.
Yeah. What did it feel like when you were playing like some of the biggest shows, that moment when you come out, like, you know, you're about to step on, you're back basically in the green room or backstage or whatever, and you're about to like step out. And I know you guys played like big festivals, etc. What was it like when like thousands and thousands of people waiting for you and probably knowing all your songs?
Yeah, I mean, it's exciting, but you also have to rev yourself up for it. It's kind of like catching. It's like sort of like, all right, think about when you're paddling for a wave and you ideally, the idea of paddling for the wave is that you're getting yourself up to speed with the wave, so that in that transition, when you're making the drop going down the face, you're already, you know, you're kind of already sort of at speed. And I think there's this similarity, like before going on, you really, the three of us, you know, and I think pretty much any band has it, but the three of us and then also the musicians that we are working with, we always had to have like these kind of, we'd have to like rev ourselves up to make sure like the adrenaline is already firing before going on stage. And I think there's nothing that prepares you for the onslaught of this huge shot of adrenaline that you do feel night after night of performing in front of hundreds of thousands of people. It's kind of like a kind of anomalous, huge adrenaline hit. And there's another thing that I think has to happen, and I wonder, I imagine pros, I'd be curious to ask you about it, because I would think pro surfers would share this, is there's something that we still had to go through where we still like viewed, like, especially when we play like a festival with like hundreds of thousands of people, we had to believe, we and at least for ourselves, looked at it a little bit like a competition, and that we had to believe that we were going to be the best, or at least tied for being the best of anybody that was going to play on that stage. You know, you have to have this belief in what you're doing. Otherwise, I just don't think you can do it. And I know that sounds, I don't even, it's like, it's almost like, to me, a little bit separate from ego.
Yeah.
Because it's like, you have to have this belief that you're beyond good. Otherwise you can't be beyond good.
You know, I
would, if you go up there and just kind of like insecure, like, we're going to try to sort of piece this together for you folks, you're just going to get eaten up.
Sure.
You know, you can do that in front of a small club, and that can be transformative and incredible. And some of my favorite shows I've ever seen are, you know, going to see somebody in a small venue where they're just literally trying something for the first time, and there's a lot to be said for that, and that can be terrifying on its own. But when you're in front on this like huge tall stage in front of hundreds of thousands of people, it's like your game plan has to be tight. You don't have the luxury. Too much gets lost in translation. You don't have the luxury of kind of like trying to figure things out in front of everybody. You have to you really have to be steering that ship.
It's interesting though, because we can parse it like in this quiet moment here, but when you're in it, I think of like a big surfing competition, like a Pipeline Masters final, of which I've never surfed in one, but I've watched many. But you're kind of riding a momentum, and it's almost like, when people crowd surf and they're kind of on the people are holding them up in the air. There's almost a metaphorical version of that happening when I would imagine you're performing and everyone's sort of warmed up and they're like in the groove, and you get to step in and sort of. There's a collective energy that's kind of steaming off the crowd, and certainly when I think of great surfing contests, that's happening with the audience in attendance. If it's the Pipe Masters, the waves are pumping and all these things creating a platform or a stage for you to jump right in and be in that place of like booming confidence. You know what I mean?
Well, it's like you're inhabiting this seat or this throne that's contextualized in this collective energy that's happening. Yeah. And it's like this right time and place moment for that person or us as a band or whoever it is to take that, embody that seat and go and do it.
What was it like being famous as a relatively young person?
Fame is weird to me now, especially as what fame means now. The world is so fucking weird. But I think for us at the beginning, being kids that grew up in New York and being in this, we grew up being kids that populated this New York City downtown nightlife scene and going to clubs and just being totally fueled by the music that we would watch bands play and DJ and that we would hear DJs playing in all these like downtown clubs like Danceteria and Mud Club and whatever. And so we were so inspired by and informed by all these things happening around us that we got to, just by the good, grace of growing up in New York City, we got to go to night after night as high schoolers. It's like we just wanted to belong so badly in that world. And so then it was really, really exciting at first when we get to this kind of like local level of fame where like first we're getting in free to all these clubs because they just kind of recognize us as being like, I don't know, we were just weird kids that all lived in the city and we travel around in a pack. And so I think that was like all these people who worked at the doors at these nightclubs were like, oh, this is kind of cool. These like really precocious kids that are running around New York City however many nights a week. Like, sure, we'll let them into our clubs for free. And then I think the next thing then was drink tickets. That was big. Was when nightclubs we learned, and we weren't there to drink. Like we really didn't know. I was so friggin' naive. I didn't even know about drinking. I was just there for the music, but then we started getting drink tickets. And I still remember actually the time I was at Eric Good's nightclub area and we got given drink tickets. And then it was either Lisa Cooper or Belinda Becker was behind the bar, and they were just like, they were like both unbelievably beautiful. And so I was like, all right, well, I have this drink ticket. So of course I'm going to go up to one of them to ask them how to use it. Because like here are these like unbelievably beautiful women that are like maybe 2 years older than I am, right? And I'm probably 15 or 16 and I don't even know what a mixed drink is. And I'm like, I just kind of naively hand them the drink ticket. I'm like, what do you think I should get? And I still remember, and I forget if it was, I think it was Lisa, but Lisa thinks it was Melinda. But anyway, Belinda, but I forget who I gave the drink ticket to, but I remember that I was given a Cosmopolitan, which in hindsight was a woman's drink. And so that says it all, I think. But anyway, my point is fame on like the local New York City like nightlife stage was awesome. Like it was great because we were like, it was all upside, no downside. And then it only, I think for us, where it really, when it got weird was when we reached this like weird tabloid level of fame, especially then when we got to after License to Ill was out and we go tour Great Britain and all this stuff comes out in tabloid newspapers that's literally, or as the British would say, literally made up. It was really surreal. That was like, that really made us like, I guess, like pump the brakes a bit, because it was like, holy shit, like, so somehow in us creating what we create and having fun making this chaos around what we create, then all of a sudden we lose control completely. And then it's like this thing takes on a life of its own, where then it gets written about unfactually, and that becomes bigger than anything that has actually happened. And I think it's interesting because I think, and now we're in this weird, everybody is in this weird feedback loop version of that every day in their reality, no matter who you are and what you believe, because everybody, no matter what, it's all filtered and algorithmed. What we're subjected to. Because we're all looking at our phones. I mean, maybe there's a lucky few that are beyond, that are not looking at their phones, but
they're a small minority at this point. Did you have any idea that some of the songs you guys did would have the life that they do now? I mean, I think of like Sabotage. I mean, it's one that everyone knows, right? Like, when you were in the studio recording this stuff or writing this stuff, did you go like, oh, we're hitting something that's going to sort of have this test of time or longevity?
No, I don't think we ever like thought test of time. Like, there's times that you think, oh, something's really working, and like Sabotage specifically, it was interesting because musically that was one of the songs that came together really rather quickly, and we talk about it in the book. But Yauk just kind of came in with this aha moment. Like, I have this bass line, and I sat down on the drums and started playing with him. Anyway, the music for all that like really came together. And we all talk about it because we remembered there was like a guy that we were renting the studio from in kind of what's now called, I guess, like the Flatiron district or whatever of Manhattan. Anyway, we were renting this studio. We liked to rent studios that weren't like the state of the art studios, that had like weirder equipment, and also that where we could book them for a long period of time without and have a little less stress of money, so it was like we didn't have the pressure of being an Electric Lady where it's a great studio and everything works, but it's also really expensive. We liked working in a way that we didn't feel as much like on the meter pressure. So anyway, Sabotage did come together musically quickly, but it sat around for months and months and months and we tried many different lyrical approaches that didn't work until and then it was even like we were almost getting kind of close to being done with the Ill Communication album, when I remember like Adam even just did those vocals. Like, he was like, I think I got something I want to try. And if I remember right, I don't think he even recorded those vocals at the house. At the studio, because we came back out to our studio that we had on the east side of Los Angeles at the time in Atwater. And I feel like he didn't even record his vocals there. I think he went to Mario's house for some reason to do the vocals. And then we all listened to it together, and we were like, we did really feel like, oh wow, finally here's this thing that we really wanted to come together, and now it has finally come together. So it did feel special that way, but I didn't it just, this thing of time, I don't know, this notion of things standing the test of time, at least for us, that we never knew until that's something, until we experienced it.
Yeah.
We never anticipated it.
Right. Well, the thing I get from your music is a sense of play and not trying too hard, you know? And I would ask you, like, when you guys were in the studio, did you manage to keep that, or did you, as you got more successful, there was more at stake and you had to deliver like a better record than the one before?
I mean, I think we had this pressure we put on ourselves. We wanted as much as possible not to totally repeat ourselves. Not that obviously there's like a vocabulary there and there's a way that we would operate, and certain things that would repeat, but to as much as possible, we just always wanted to venture and push ourselves to venture into doing something new. And then I think, and then it's just like pushing harder, not settling for good enough, and I think it's interesting looking back at it. That's something that all Adam, myself, we all had that in different manifestations of that in our own ways of this not settling, and the group really benefited from it.
Yeah. When you look back on your career, what are you most proud of? Is there anything that stands out that really you go like, this is where it all came together?
I think we are most proud of. Well, first off, our and I've talked about it before, but our relationship as a band and with each other, that remained prioritized literally up until the very end. That was the most important thing. And then and you'd also just sort of shed a little bit of light on it, is that as much as we took a lot extremely seriously and we really pushed ourselves in terms of what we were making and how we were making it, and pushing ourselves to have it be not only new but also and innovative, but also like of a certain quality. But I think the fact that we actually enjoyed doing it, and that we also prioritized that we did really do, in hindsight, I think a pretty good job of, we really had the luxury of sort of being able to check with each other and say, and like, are we still loving doing this? And if not, then maybe we should take a little break for a little while, and we got to do that every now and then, which I think that's a really hard thing. And I think it's harder now in the economic music environment of today. But I think that's part of what enabled us to keep doing it for as long as we did. And kind of keeping it, I don't know, genuine is because we were able to keep this relationship intact. But that only could have been possible with the luxury of being able to, being able to take some time.
So, for the last, 6 or 7 years, I've lived in Malibu, and I see you surfing regularly. And it's really interesting because as I started early on in this, thinking about the Beastie Boys back in the late 80s, early 90s, it seemed like such a different world, I guess. And yeah, I mean, coming from, growing up in New York and that sort of urban lifestyle, what is your lifestyle like today? Clearly you're surfing a lot.
Yeah. Well, my lifestyle today is nothing I could have, 19 or 20-year-old me could have, New York City 19 or 20-year-old me could have fathomed. I mean, I grew up in Manhattan. We were talking about it earlier. I grew up part of my life kind of like in Central Park, going to nightclubs, being, it was kind of unfathomable for a lot of my early life. The idea of like going to sleep at like 2 or 3 in the morning would be an early night. So my circadian rhythm was very much like on this night shift. And so I think that me wouldn't have fathomed the me now that prioritizes sleep and quality time with my kid. I mean, kids I think are something you don't foresee, or maybe some people do. I didn't until it became part of my reality. And I'm so grateful that it did, but I didn't know, that's really, I didn't foresee prioritizing my life around the relationships that I have and having lasting quality time with the people that I love, and and sort of maintaining good health so that I'm here for all those people for as long as possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I see you surfing with your two sons all the time, which has just got to be a real joy.
Yeah, it is. And I'm lucky because they're, as you've seen, they're pretty fun. It turns out they're pretty fun to surf with.
They've gotten really good, and they're great finless. The slip and slide is just fantastic.
They're big on the slip and slide.
Yeah, and they often ride together too.
Yeah, which makes it really more fun for everybody because then it maximizes wave enjoyment.
Yeah, for sure.
Or efficiency. So it's
if they share a wave, that's one more wave available for the rest of us.
Exactly. It's like by going together, that's leaving more for the rest of us.
Yeah. Is surfing a central thing in your life?
I think at this point, yeah. I really want to live. I think I'm actually open now, especially now that my kids are getting older. Like I'm open. I don't know if I need to be as wed to being in Malibu in a way as I've been. That was something that I think I discovered a lot like this last summer, spending some time in Europe with my girlfriend Nadia over there. But I think no matter where it is, like I still want to be able to have surfing kind of as long as I'm able to do it, kind of be part of my ongoing life, as much as I can choose to do it.
Yep.
But that's also one of the amazing things about surfing, that we can be pretty nomadic.
Yeah.
Surfers, we can be pretty nomadic.
Yep.
We're actually kind of out of necessity pretty nomadic people.
Yep. No, it's a big part of the fun. Well, thank you so much, Mike.
All right. Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah.
I'll see you in the water.
Okay. Soundings is produced by me, Jamie Brisick, and Jonathan Shiflett. Our theme song is Neptune's Next by Little Wings. The Surfer's Journal is a reader-supported publication made possible by sponsorship from Birdwell, FCS, Patagonia, Rainbow, Vans, Vissla, and Yeti. To subscribe, please visit surfersjournal.com. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you again.